So I really want to start with the first risk that we got from the Eurasia Group. It is a G0 world. Talk to us about what that is and why that was chosen as the top risk for you and your team.
Great, absolutely. So, the way that we think about a G0 world, one in which there's, to a certain extent, zero gravity, is really that many of the institutions that have underpinned the international security order, the international economic order, are no longer what they once were. And that's a good and a bad thing. These institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, the UN Security Council, don't necessarily represent, where power and global dynamics are today. Certainly didn't in the 70s and later when they were created. But that really means that there is a level of contestation and agitation for more representation generally of the global South, but also where there is a great power contestation between the US and China, for example, within those institutions still. And many of the world's whether you sort of call them middle income countries or swing states, and here I'm talking about Turkey, Brazil, South Africa, India, they're all looking for a new placement and a new way in which the world should work. And this, I think, very fraught period, in global politics, where you have Donald Trump returning, somebody who famously is not interested in multilateralism. That moment meeting this one that we're in now, in which these institutions are being forced to change, really, I think, has driven what we see as an underlying cause of again, that zero gravity, or at least an underpinning, a weakening of the underpinning of many of these institutions that really have shaped the way that the world has worked in recent decades.
Ziyanda, how does that trickle then into the global South and some of these other countries you were mentioning, South Africa and Turkey? Is it an opportunity, or is it potentially even more of a risk?
It really is a double-edged sword. I think that there is plenty of opportunity, again, for many of these kind of middle-income or swing states to really assert themselves going forward. Again, you think of an India and its trajectory and where it's heading towards the world's, economic stage and its own ambitions. But at the same time, it is really difficult for smaller countries who have less access to, again, global financing systems, and especially those in which really large and important geopolitical decisions are being made, such as the Security Council. It's the less representation you have of those countries in which, again, this new world order really has a particular effect, and one that is disproportionate to, your larger economies. I think the harder it is to kind of keep the semblance of global norms, again, a general world order in which there are rules the countries are meant to play by, and that handbook goes out the window. And I think, again, that's very, very difficult territory to navigate for countries that feel like they are caught between one side and the other.
How do you determine then, Ziyanda, Africa's greatest risk? Because, of course, a global war, a chasm between the world order will, in and of itself, affect Africa. How do you think about the continent then in that factor?
I think, interestingly, we're already starting to see what that looks like. We're with what we've identified as a top risk 7 and top risk 9. The first being, a kind of Trump-induced economic slowdown, just as you were talking about in earlier segments around this unpredictability, around Trump's views on tariffs, the will he, won't he of that uncertainty is very, very difficult for countries that are looking to expand their export markets or are almost dependent on them largely. And there are a number of those countries that are on the African continent that are going to struggle, I think, going forward to navigate, very difficult changes, again, in economic policy and trade policy, and the unpredictability that comes with that. And then on, looking at another angle, is this where there is a lack of leadership on the global stage in terms of a lot of these security issues. We're already seeing that in places like Libya and Sudan and others on the continent, and that becomes even more pronounced, even more difficult, essentially to intervene within, unless you're looking at particular actors. And here I'm thinking about the United Arab Emirates, for example, and other countries that have their own specific national interest or economic interest intervening in a way that, again, is not the same as a UN Security Council or UN mandated forces being involved in certain conflicts. So it's to use an old adage, we certainly are in a very, very different new world, and one in which I think some of us, and particularly I think in the Global South, will struggle to grapple with.
And finally, Ziyanda, can you talk to the humanitarian aspect of that? Because that was also something that you and the team noted, especially on the continent and in the Global South.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to be difficult going forward to sort of work again along these lines of multilateralism to really have global cooperation and just a sort of common framework or common agenda going forward. And once that is the case, there are different directions, different interests pulling in different ways, and that's at the end of the day, I think the exact environment in which markets are the most unsettled and the most, sort of not directionless, but certainly being pulled in different directions. And it's never particularly positive where there is that much uncertainty, volatility, and unpredictability. And I think worse so for several African countries and economies.